Hello everyone, my name is Pixlriffs and welcome back to the Minecraft Survival Guide. I hope you're all having a good day. In today's episode, before we get into the main tutorial portion, I have done what I said I was going to do in the previous episode, and I have put together every set of armor trim composed here on Iron Armor, so you can see all of them in action. And my word, this was actually a lot of effort, mostly because I had to craft 16 suits of iron armor, and I even had a couple of materials in here that I wanted to test out, which were fairly expensive, like the netherite right there. I also had to make sure I got enough diamonds, but I forgot about the ones that I brought back from the end cities, so fortunately I had enough diamonds to test these out. And I have tried, where possible, to make each of these thematic to the type of armor trim we are adding on here, but bear in mind that not all armor trims are going to look the best on iron armor. Let's say I used an iron trim on an iron armor, for example. If I put the iron ingot in the smithing table when I was trimming the armor, it would still show up as a darker area of the armor. It would be like a shadowy version of an armor trim as opposed to a highlight like I think the rest of these are. But still, using iron and quartz is not really going to help the design stand out, which was the purpose of this whole exercise. We really wanted to see the individual designs of each piece of armor trim, and surprisingly, even though it feels like there aren't really many pixels for them to work with on stuff like boots and leggings, at least not the visible pixels, because leggings are obviously going to have a few different varieties. Let's say we grab this and we'll put this on instead of my netherite leggings. You can still kind of see that there is an upper area which would be concealed by a chest plate if I wore one, but I'm wearing elytra the majority of the time. You can see that there's a lot of variety in these. Like, even in the boots, they've managed to fit in a whole bunch of different variety in the textures. And I wanted to label each of these, even just for the purposes of this video. Maybe I should have done that, but that was really just going to get in the way of all of the barrels and stuff here. In fact, I already had to compromise a little bit and boost every other piece of armor up by half a block using slabs, just so that they wouldn't all blend together with their shoulder pieces of the chest plates standing shoulder to shoulder, and so we could get a clear look at what each of these designs actually looks like. I'm going to grab a bit of scaffolding so we can pillar up here so you can see a little bit more of what's going on with the boots, because you can't see all of that from ground level, and in some cases, there's even some distinctions about the helmets that I wanted to point out as well. So on this side, I've arranged all of the armor trims that you can get from a trail ruins, and I've arranged them in alphabetical order, so that is Host, Razor, Shaper, and Wayfinder, and those are all relatively plain, I want to say. They're all fairly simple designs. Personally, I like the fact that the chest plates have like cuffs around the edges of the sleeves where the player's arms would stick out. I think that's kind of cool, and this one obviously has the stripe across the center of the chest plate, while this one does not. And the rest of them have just kind of wiggly lines here and there, nothing too much going on the helmets, and the boots all seem fairly straightforward. I think I like the Wayfinder boots best out of all of them, because they still have a couple of highlight pixels in there. Next up, we have the Coast armor trim, which is the one that I already have on my boots and helmet, since it was the first armor trim I ever found. You find these quite frequently in shipwrecks, and you find shipwrecks frequently enough that it's fairly common to get hold of the Coast armor trim. I expect a lot of players will have that, and as I mentioned with the other two armor trims over here, the Host and the Shaper armor trim, this one also has the cuffs on the sleeves, which looks pretty cool. The next two here are actually kind of similar, especially in the chest plate design, but I think they have that connectivity of the different pieces down really well. This is the Dune armor trim, which you'll find in a desert temple, and this one is the Eye armor trim that you find in strongholds. And the Dune armor trim looks very regal. I trimmed it in gold because it felt like the most appropriate thing for the desert temple, but I kind of like the fact that this is a larger ring with a dot in the center, and then the Eye trim is obviously a lot more inspired by the Eyes of Ender that you need to activate the portal in the stronghold to begin with. And while the Dune armor trim has a lot of these diagonal lines, and I think those connect to the helmet texture really well, the Eye armor trim actually has this rounded off section of the leggings there that kind of, once again, resembles a circular pattern kind of inspired by the Eye of Ender. It's even got like a circular pattern on the shoulders of the chest piece as well, but the helmet is relatively unadorned. It kind of looks like the eyes of an Enderman with the two separate sections there. So that might be the kind of thing that you'd want to trim in purple, just to mimic Enderman eyes that little bit extra. Next up, the Tide armor trim, the one that you get from an ocean monument, is pretty self-explanatory. It all looks like prismarine bricks, and in fact, on the top of this, this is the first one that's really got something going over the top part of the helmet. I haven't really looked at the backs of these all that much, but there's not a great deal going on the back that isn't going on the front of a lot of these. A lot of them are just symmetrical designs all the way around. But the tied armor trim keeps that prismarine brick pattern going over the top of it. So if you want a helmet that looks like it's got some kind of design over the top, that and the sentry armor trim are the ones that you really need to look for. And the silence armor trim, of course, but we'll get to that because that's really the exception out of all of these armor trims for a reason I'll get to in a second. Next up, we have the Spire armor trim, and of course, this is inspired by the End Cities and shulker boxes, so it's already got that kind of shulker box pattern to it where the shulkers kind of open up like the way shulker boxes do, and you'll see that there's that join in there that's very different from a standard chest that just has a flat join to it. The pixels on the edges of the sleeves also kind of remind me of chainmail armor, so that's kind of a neat thing. I wonder how that would look on chainmail armor. That's something we'll have to do in the future, but getting hold of chainmail is another completely different exercise because that involves a lot of trading with villagers or getting it from random mobs. The next two I have trimmed in green because this is the wild armor trim, the one that you get from jungle temples, which are naturally a very green environment, and the sentry armor trim I figured may as well trim it with emerald because this is the one from a pillager outpost. And it's interesting, the kind of plus shape that you've got here, these four individual dots, are also quite similar to the way that pillager outposts and woodland mansions are designed. They have that wall pattern with 4 dark oak logs in there, so that's kind of an interesting reference to that texture overall, and pretty neat that they've been able to incorporate that into the chest plate here. It's also there on the leggings a little bit, although it doesn't quite extend to the boots or the helmet. But once again, the helmet is the one that has that big stripe over the center that kind of reminds me of a leather helmet whenever you dye leather armor, and it keeps that brown stripe down the center of it. Honestly, not a whole lot to say about the wild armor trim though. It's got a little bit of fringe around the outside of the helmet, which I think works in its favor, but it doesn't quite look the way you'd expect jungle temple armor to look. Obviously, it's not quite as random and chaotic as the jungle environment. It's not going to look particularly vine-like or whatever, but it's still kind of, I feel like, a missed opportunity. It's the most lackluster out of all of these, I think. The next one, though, has a bunch of character by contrast. This right here is the Vex armor trim, the one that you get from Woodland Mansions, and this really allows you the opportunity to cosplay as an evoker. Imagine this chestplate was netherite instead of iron. I simply couldn't spare my netherite chestplate for this, but that would look really like an evoker's robe, just on account of it being a gold collar and this sort of gold front piece, along with the black canvas of the netherite armor. And the cool thing about this is the helmet actually has something in the shape of evoker or even Vex eyebrows on there, so you could also do some fun stuff with that as well. You'll also notice, compared to some of the other armor trims that keep the shading of these relatively plain, this one really stands out, and it may stand out because we've trimmed it in gold. Compare the two gold armor sets for a second, and you'll notice that the evoker one, the Vex armor trim, really has a lot of darker pixels in it that allow for some shadow, and there's depth there that I think is really important to giving the armor trim a little extra character. I like that a lot about the sentry armor trim there and about the eye armor trim as well. Next to that, the ones from the nether, we have the rib and snout armor trims side by side, and speaking of dark pixels, the rib armor trim darkens whatever material it is given. If you trim something else with redstone, you'll find a lot brighter reds appear in it, whereas the rib armor trim keeps everything fairly dark. If we were to trim it with diamond, you'd notice a lot of those darker pixels that you see over there kind of incorporated into this design, which is just a set of stripes all the way around. Naturally, that suits the rib description perfectly, and I think is a really neat way of trimming your armor, so I think that's probably one that you would want to keep as a full set, just for the sake of theming overall. It's immediately recognizable, and it kind of does what it says on the tin, so that gets points from me just for consistency, I suppose. The snout armor trim is an interesting one, actually. It's a little bit difficult to get what's going on here while the full suit of armor is assembled, because this is the one that you get from piglin bastions, and at first glance, I don't know, it doesn't necessarily look all that piglin-y to me. But then you realize that the arms on this could look a little bit like piglin ears. There are these little dots on either side of the helmet, which on the one hand could make you look like a lizard of some kind, where the eyes are kind of on the side of the head. Looks a little bit dinosaur-like, but could also be part of the dots of a snout, and the boots also have that going on for themselves. The leggings for this one, I think, are actually really interesting and unique. They've got this central spot in the middle and then 3 dots next to that, but obviously those dots are going to split up slightly when you walk because of the way the player texture works, and so there are actually 2 dots on each leg. It's just that they combine when you're standing still. If we remove the chest plate from this, you can see that in a little bit more detail here on the armor stand. So I think the snout armor trim offers you some really interesting opportunities, and imagine this on the side of a turtle shell helmet and having the green turtle shell with the black eyes on the outside. I think that'll look kind of cool. Like I said, kind of lizard-like, a bit dinosaur armor if you want that kind of thing. Last but absolutely not least, in fact probably the most interesting out of all of them, we have the Ancient City armor trims, the Ward here and of course Silence here on the right. The Ward one obviously is meant to be a big old call out to the Warden, and naturally the central square there with the 2 Mickey Mouse ears on either side is meant to represent the Warden and its kind of tendril-like appendages that it uses to detect the player's vibrations. I trimmed this in diamonds, kind of evocative of the Skulk blocks, because there's a lot of cyan going on in that deep dark biome, but to be honest, the remainder of the pieces here are not all that special. I really think it's the chest piece that stands out above all of them. But standing out above all of the other armor trims in general is the Silence armor trim, and you can see why they made this the rarest thing in the game, because it is probably the coolest looking. Not only does it have a really neat design with the kind of skeletal look to it, obviously you've got like a ribcage thing there, almost looks like the Wither in a way, but the helmet has so much going on the top of it as well. And the main thing about this is that it trims more than 50% of the overall texture of the armor with the material you're using to trim it. So at a first glance, you can't really tell whether this is diamond armor or iron armor, except for the fact that obviously we've been using iron armor for the remainder of these sets. And I think quite aside from the amount of detail that goes into this armor trim, it's got a really cool texture on the back as well as the front, whilst the rest of these mostly have the same thing on the front that they do on the back. Naturally, the amount of detail and shading and other stuff in this is going to make it the most desirable armor piece, and so it's fairly understandable that most players, if they are interested in this kind of aesthetic detail, are going to seek out this armor trim and probably have a hard time doing it, judging by my experience. I'm still working on exactly how I want my own armor to look, and naturally we're not going to be seeing the chest plate the majority of the time, but I do think the Silence armor trim wins out in terms of what you want to have on a chest plate. I do think the Vex armor trim is pretty cool if you want to go for that evoker look, and I think gold on netherite is going to look especially cool. But so far on my armor, I have a lapis blue material here. We're missing the chest plate, we don't have anything on the leggings, and then we have iron on the boots, and I want to go for a kind of blue through white gradient, kind of similar to the pattern I have on my channel branding and on my Minecraft skin. And if I was being really detail oriented about this, I might pick out one of these armor trims simply because you could use that to mimic the pattern of what's going on my Minecraft skin in the first place. Like the wavy pattern on the front of Wayfinder could very easily fill in those pixels of my jumper that's actually based on an item of clothing I own, and trimming that in diamond would probably give the effect that I wanted, or maybe using the rib armor trim to do something with diamond and that as well. I don't know if the Silence armor trim is necessarily how I want to go if we're trying to just emulate what I have on the skin beneath. But either way, we're going to step away from that for now because we've done basically everything I want to today with armor trim, and honestly I will need a lot more diamonds before I can duplicate any more of these. We have saved at least one of each of the armor trim templates, but I will need to acquire some more diamonds if we're going to duplicate any of these any more times. One last thing before we go though, it's worth noting that by trimming a bunch of these suits of armor with different designs, we got the Smithing with Style challenge, which requires you to apply the Spire, Snout, Rib, Ward, Silence, Vex, Tide, and Wayfinder smithing templates to a piece of armor at least once. So a lot of folks were asking, what's the point of armor trims when they don't really add anything other than aesthetics? They don't add any kind of extra abilities to your armor or whatever. Well, there is one attitude you can look at this from, and it's a challenge to acquire a bunch of these, apply them to some armor, and complete some more advancements. Similar to some of these other advancements that don't really have any practical use to the player, like playing a music disc in a meadow biome, you know, you can just treat these as some fun activities that you can consider doing in your world if you want to be collectionist and completionist about your Minecraft experience. And in this case, the amount of smithing templates that you need and the variety of locations that you need to go to find them means that you experience a lot of different parts of the game. These smithing templates come from the End City, a Piglin Bastion, a Nether Fortress, 2 from the Ancient City, 1 from a Woodland Mansion, 1 by defeating Elder Guardians in an Ocean Monument, and of course the Wayfinder from excavating a Trail Ruins. So that's asking you to do 5 or 6 different activities in your world that you might not be doing otherwise. Of course, there are plenty of reasons to go and visit an End City. There may hopefully be other reasons to visit an Ancient City in future, and the Nether Fortress and the Bastion are also going to be important sites for most players who are interested in gameplay progression and exploration, but it's still kind of a fun thing that the game prompts you to do stuff like that, even if you wouldn't have considered it otherwise. And now we're going to finally move on from armor trim, but we're going to keep it in the vein of customizing your equipment today, because there is one major piece of customization for our gear we have overlooked until now, and that is the shield. It is actually possible to apply designs to your shield if you wanted to personalize that, and while my current shield is looking a little the worse for wear and has absolutely no decorations whatsoever, I know quite a bit about how to set these things up so that they will look good. And along the way, we get to talk about banners, which is why I'm hanging out in front of my sheep farm. So we're going to go up here and grab a few different colors of wool, and we're going to craft some of these into banners. Banners are a really neat way of adding an expressive touch to your world. They are crafted with a single stick and 6 pieces of the same color of wool. In this case, we'll get a cyan banner from that one, a white banner from the white wool, and a black banner from the black wool. And these are just the base banners, and you can apply these to your shield if you want to, just like this. You just got to craft it together in a crafting interface with the shield. And as you can see, we now have a black shield. It won't change anything about the shield's stats or durability. It's just for cosmetics, right? It's just for personalization, and it doesn't even require a special interface. You don't need to do this in a loom or an anvil or anything like that. I now have a completely blank shield covering up that wooden section the shield had before. But to get the most out of banners, you're going to require a loom. And a loom is very simple to craft. It's just 2 pieces of string and 2 planks. It is also the workstation block for a shepherd. So if you've been dealing with villagers, or if you found yourself a village in your world, chances are you've encountered one of these already. Popping down the loom here in our storage building, we can take a look at the interface. And here there are obviously slots for a banner, some sort of paint palette style thing, which you assume implies dye, and a banner pattern. But we can take a look at some existing patterns by popping a banner in here with a dye already. So let me grab red dye, since I have so much of that from the iron farm. And with a white banner and some red dye, you'll notice a bunch of different designs appear. You can preview each of these in this available space on the side here by clicking on one of them, and that will show you how that design applies to the banner you've placed in here. So we can obviously swap this over for the cyan banner, we can put the white banner back in there, and you can click through each of these on the interface to apply the designs. In earlier versions of Minecraft, these were added using a crafting table. You would simply put the dye in the crafting table slots in a certain position to add on the designs. So for example, if you wanted to have a red dot in the middle of a white banner, this is how you would arrange it. And before the loom, if you're playing in an older version of Minecraft, that is how you would have to apply them. Anytime from Minecraft 1.8 to 1.13, I believe, is the range that you'd have to apply that stuff using a crafting table. Instead, though, the loom gave you access to a more visual interface for designing banners, and while some national flags are a little bit more complex, the basic patterns that you have here will allow you to create some flags of existing countries. For example, the flag of Japan is pretty straightforward to make, and while it's kind of on its side if you were looking at it as a flag, it's still kind of a neat thing to have in there. Of course, we could do the St. George's Cross, which is the flag of England, and if we start with a green banner, if we add in a yellow diamond to that, a yellow lozenge as it calls it in the heraldic terms that are in the game, and then add a blue roundel on that, you have something approximating the flag of Brazil. The flag of Brazil actually has a white stripe across there plus a bunch of stars inside the blue field, but it's close enough, right? So it's possible with those basic shapes to make a few pre-existing flags, and if you mess up, all you need to do is get a cauldron of water and right-click on it with the banner, and that will remove the last layer you added. And now if we crafted another shield, I'm kind of dual wielding shields here, so let me take this one off and put that in the offhand. So right now we've got a blank shield. if we combine this with one of the banners that we put a design on, you'll notice that the design copies over to the shield, although it will display a little bit differently thanks to the fact that the area on the shield has a 1 pixel border around it, and instead of just trimming that border off of the banner design, Minecraft decides to try and squish down the design into a smaller area, and so a little bit of reduction in the image scale is going to occur, and you'll end up with a slightly different design a lot of the time to what you see on a banner, which is a shame really, because banners are capable of some fairly complex designs simply by layering them up in different ways. Let's add this red roundel banner back into here, and let's add, I don't know, maybe one of these around the outside, so that now it's got this viney layer traveling around the outside of the banner, and it looks, once again, a bit more red than white. We can go back in and add some vertical stripes to that, and now it looks like a completely different design. If anything, now your eye is drawn to the negative space, and you're looking more at what the white lines are doing than all of the red patterns layering up to create this. And this is one of the other cool things about banner design, is using negative space in this way, using the background color as the design, and using the designs that you're layering on top of it subtractively, so you're removing areas of it. When you're working this way, however, it's worth noting that some of the designs aren't going to overlap in particularly productive ways. Like, for example, if I cut off the entire bottom half of this banner with red, like so, and then I want to add a triangle to that coming up from the bottom, it's not going to make any difference whatsoever to the design. It's not going to layer it over the top any darker, it's all going to be the same color. Whereas if I obviously put a triangle in from the top, that's starting to look like a pair of monstrous eyes. But of course, when the majority of this is red, we can go back over with the white dye and layer another white design over the top of it. So if we want to give our monster some lower teeth like that, then we can add one of these indented white bases to it. And then we end up with a monster that looks like it's got a bit of an underbite. It doesn't look especially scary, but you get the idea, right? And as we saw with our Brazilian flag, you don't have to stick to just one color. It's just a color that I have a great deal of, so it's useful for examples. The way I like to do my banners is once again a reference to my Minecraft skin and that jumper that I wear in real life. So I'm going to start with a white banner, and we're going to layer a bunch of patterns over the top of it using black, light blue, and blue. We're going to start with a solid blue stripe down one half of it, like so. We're going to put that back in here and apply the blue dye in a central stripe, which should be in here somewhere. I'm missing it. There it is. Okay, so we end up with a blue, light blue, and white striped banner, which I think looks pretty cool on its own. But then over the top of that, we're going to lay some other designs. We're going to have a set of stripes like that, which obviously split it up into different sections with the light blue in the center and sort of 2 stripes or 1.5 stripes of the other colors on either side. And we can cut off those side colors by putting it back in with a black background and having a black border around the outside, so that we end up with these 3 main stripes like so. And if we wanted to, we could go back in and reshape the entire thing using the indented border, and I think that works out quite well. But another option I have is using the brick pattern to imply a kind of woven fabric looking design to it. And I actually only want that to apply to one of the colors on this banner, so I'm going to go back a couple of stages. We're going to wash off the last few layers here on the cauldron. I'm going to add in the brick pattern to both sides of the banner before I layer in the light blue stripe. Then we're going to go back to the black dye, add in the vertical stripes, and add in that solid border around the outside. And now we've got something that looks like it's knit on either side, like so, but has that solid blue stripe down the middle. I think we're going to leave the indented border off the final design, but I am going to add it for now, just so I can show you one other thing, and that's that once a banner reaches 6 designs, in survival mode, that is the maximum you can place on top of a base banner. In this case, our white banner has had 6 layers added to it, and you notice even when we put a dye in here, we cannot add any more designs here in the loom. 6 is the maximum. In this case, I actually only wanted 5, so I'm going to remove that last layer, and this is the one that we're going to add to a shield. If you want to remove a design from a shield, there isn't really much you can do except for combine it with another shield in your crafting interface to simply get a blank shield back. And at that point, I'm going to combine it with this one to get myself the shield that I will probably be using for the remainder of the series. And it's kind of got a Morse code thing going on. Once again, the design has changed slightly thanks to the fact that the banner design is being squished into a smaller canvas. It's kind of asymmetrical, which some people might not like a whole bunch, so maybe we'll change change it in future, I'm not sure, but there are plenty of other banner designs that we can get hold of, and some of them have to be gotten hold of in different ways. You might remember when we've raided bastions in the past, we've gotten hold of something called the snout banner pattern, and I believe I have a few of those waiting for me in here. Yes, there we go. So this snout banner pattern is actually a pattern you can apply to the Loom to get a design that you can't get by default in the Loom. You have to acquire one of these before you can use it. And there are a couple more of these that are crafted by the player, including one that requires an enchanted golden apple. So thankfully we have a bunch of enchanted golden apples. In fact, we have more than I have regular golden apples, since we were raiding so many ancient cities to try to find the silence armor trim. And another one of these custom patterns can only be acquired if you have an oxeye daisy growing on the plains near you. Bring that to your storage room and combine it with a piece of paper to make yourself a banner pattern. That can be done in any crafting interface you want to. We just can add a paper in with this oxeye daisy and we'll get the flower charge banner pattern, and then we can do the same thing with the enchanted golden apple to get the thing banner pattern. And let's throw these in the Loom along with our cyan banner, and when we apply some dye here, you'll notice that yes, you get a central flower design, which can be combined in really interesting ways with some of the other designs that you can get by default in the Loom. For example, if we wanted to put a red dot in the center of this, which is going to look kind of hideous against the cyan background, but bear with me. If we pop that in there, we pop the white flower charge in over the top of that, suddenly you've got a red central section where the transparency in the flower charge design is, but you end up with the white flower around the outside, separating it from the cyan border, and suddenly it looks a little bit more interesting. If we apply the snout banner pattern to this plain white banner, you'll notice that it looks like a piglin's snout, but also has that kind of cartoony, pixelated eyes kind of look to it. Maybe you could design a banner where that's the face of a little 8-bit character like Mega Man or something like that, I don't know. We can remove that and we can add in the thing banner pattern, and this should be recognizable to anybody who has recently looked at the old school Mojang logo. It's a little different to the logo they use these days, but you often saw this sort of Apple-esque design whenever you logged into the game, and that was above the Mojang Studios text. You might still see it if you log into older versions or modded instances or something like that. You'll notice that the banner patterns aren't consumed by this process in the same way that armor trims are. So once you've got hold of one of these banner patterns that's ostensibly more expensive, like the thing banner pattern, you can use it over and over again to add more details to these banners. And if you're wondering why this is called the thing banner pattern, I'll briefly explain that. Mojang, the company name, is actually named after the Swedish word mojang, which just sort of means thingy or, miscellaneous object. It's kind of like an equivalent in English would be widget or doodad. When you're grasping for the right word for the TV remote and you can't remember what it's called, pass me the thingy, that's that kind of connotation that it has. And so when you hear people call Mojang Mojang when they pronounce it that way, it's not necessarily inaccurate. It's not like the official pronunciation, but a lot of the people who work at Mojang are Swedish, and so they naturally want to pronounce it Mojang because that's how the Swedish J is pronounced. Anyway, we're getting a little bit off track here, but I want to hang this banner up somewhere distinct, so we're going to pop it over here on the left-hand side as we exit the door, and that is at least a reminder that we are playing Mojang's game. Now, we've got our shield design figured out for now, but there are some more things that we can do with banners, and in fact, I might actually decide to do that with this banner that I've just put up here in my storage room, because banners have additional functionality when combined with maps. I'm going to head over to somewhere I've got an anvil. I think the best place is probably still up near my enchanting setup, and we are going to name this banner, and we're going to name it after one of the things that is in this region. I guess we'll call that storage hall, since that's going to mark exactly where our storage hall is, and as you can see, the banner is now named. That's not an especially surprising thing, of course, that's sort of what anvils do anyway, but if we hang this banner up in here, this will now have an interaction with maps. We're going to craft a compass together with 8 pieces of paper and make an empty map, and we're going to head over to the entrance to our storage hall, which might not be at the dead center of the map, but let's open this up and see. Okay, there we go. This is what our spawn area looks like these days, and it's actually developed quite a lot since the last time I mapped this place. But now if we jump up here and right-click on this banner that's attached to the wall with the map, you'll notice that the storage hall actually gets marked on the map with a little banner, and it's a white banner because we started with a white banner there. But let's say we wanted to take one of our other banners and mark something else in this area. Once again, we'll need to do that in an anvil, but let's say we want to label the mud factory. I'm going to scaffold up here and we'll place it dead center behind the door, since this is an area you can't really see from the ground. We're going to place a banner attached to this block here. We're going to right click on that with the map, and now the mud factory is labeled, and it's labeled with a different color marker. Because it's a cyan banner, the mud card factory marker there appears cyan, while the storage hall one appears white. And that's obviously based on the base banner color, not any additional designs that you've laid on top of it. And this can be a really neat way of labeling stuff that's in your base, if you want to show other players around, for example, or if you just want to keep track of where everything is and label everything on a display somewhere. This is the ideal way to do it. Now, Bedrock Edition players only recently got the ability to add any kind of banner designs to shields, so I'm not certain if the banner functionality of being able to label stuff in the world actually works yet. But on Java Edition at least, players can enjoy this additional functionality for banners, which allows you to label some of the stuff in your world, and I think that's a really fun thing to do. Whenever I return to this functionality, I always want to immediately fly around my world, mapping the entire thing out and labeling some stuff that I might not have come back to or something like that. Just make a big map room somewhere. So maybe we'll make that a project for a future episode. But for now, I will recommend a couple of other resources for if you want to customize both your banners and your armor trims. There are a couple of really great websites that allow you to mess around with a few of these things and test them out before you bring them into the game and spend potentially expensive resources on them. For banners, you want to look at planetminecraft.com/banner, and I'll link that in the video description as well. That's got a really great interface that's kind of like the interface of the Loom, which allows you to choose the colors and the designs, and will even show you a couple of designs that we haven't looked at in today's video simply because I don't have the resources to make them. It's possible to make a banner pattern that has a creeper face on it, but I don't have a creeper head, and getting hold of those is potentially a little difficult. There's also a wither skull banner pattern, and I don't have any spare wither skulls, so we'll get to those in a future episode where we'll go through a bunch of different cool banner designs that I've come up with over the years, and cool ones that I've seen out there in the community as well. But planetminecraft.com/banner is a great tool for designing some banners and taking a look at how those different layers can interact and produce some cool and interesting designs. The other one is Mindtrim. Mindtrim is another website that I'll link in the description, and it's a simple tool for determining what you want to put on your armor trim with a simple interface that lets you choose the type of armor trim, and the material you're trimming it with, and it's a really straightforward way of seeing what the armor trims look like and how they can combine before you have to spend the resources on that in-game. So I'm going to be planning out my ideal suit of armor over there, and for now, I think that's where we're going to leave it for this episode of the Minecraft Survival Guide. Folks, I do hope you've enjoyed taking a look at banners and armor trims with me, and hopefully now you have some cool ideas for customizing your own character's look, even if you can't see your Minecraft skin through that armor. But that's all from me. My name has been Pixlriffs. Don't forget to leave a like on this video if you enjoyed it, subscribe if you want to see more, and I'll see you folks soon. Take care. Bye for now.